Hello everyone and welcome to another episode by Engineering Today, where we're going to discuss 3 updates today. So, let's set go. SpaceX is now preparing its Starship SN8 model for the first high-altitude flight test. It'll be a big leap for SpaceX's Starship program as SN8 will attempt to reach an altitude of 15 kilometers, about 50,000 feet. Thus, there's no guarantee of success. This first-time tests have 50-50 chance as it may or may not be successful. The flight test of SN8 could end up destroying the prototype. SpaceX is planning to counter that risk with its upcoming Starship prototypes. An RUD, rapidly unscheduled disassembly, explosion, right off launch pad is also possible. Fortunately, SN9 is almost ready, Musk stated on Saturday. SpaceX's Starship SN8 is currently waiting on the launch pad for its second static fire test. The test was initially expected to begin on Sunday, November 1st. As per that test window was scheduled to open for 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. However, on Monday, just a few hours before opening the window, the test was delayed by the company itself for some unknown reason. Recently, new road closures on the 5th and 6th were requested. If, for some reason, SN8 is destroyed during the flight test, SpaceX will use the gathered data on its upcoming Starship prototypes. The company is wasting no time to develop multiple prototypes for its Starship program. A few days ago, Boca Chica Gale tweeted, "Starship SN9 is heading into the high bay." Now, as SpaceX's SN9 already received its body flaps, the only 2 that's missing is a nose cone and Raptors. According to the information, SpaceX partially completed SN9's nose section, and soon it will be placed on top of previously stacked 5 steel rings. Production of SN9's nose cone couldn't be spotted as SpaceX was working behind closed doors of its nose production tent. The data from SN8's flight test will help to point out what kind of modifications it needs in the near future. On Monday, SpaceX fully stacked SN10's tank and engine section, thus completing the cylindrical structure, which functions as the rocket's airframe, engine mounts, and propellant tanks. As per that, several posts appeared on Twitter saying, "Starship SN10 stacked as SN9 receives aft flaps." Although there are still some major works remaining on SN10, such as external and internal plumbing and installing avionics, after that, SN10 will receive its ship's aero covers and flaps. Then the same routine will be applied for installing the ship's nose cone fitted with 2 side flaps. Let's move to the next update now. As per the recent announcement that came from the European space officials, stated that the Ariane 6 rocket would launch no earlier than the second quarter of 2022. The announcement made clear that the ESA launch vehicle is delayed from its initial launch date. The maiden flight for Vega C is planned to take place in June 2021, that for Ariane 6 for the second quarter of 2022, according to a Twitter post from the European Space Agency. The development cost of Ariane 6 project is estimated to be about 3.6 billion euros. The Ariane 6 rocket is an expendable launch system, which is under the authority of European Space Agency. If we take a look into Ariane 6's launch calendar, it was originally scheduled to launch in the end of 2020. However, in May 2020, the European Space Agency delayed the debut of their rocket to 2021 due to the global pandemic. Now, in a recent teleconference with reporters, the European officials again brought up the launch date of the Ariane 6 rocket. They're planning to launch the Ariane 6 rocket in the second quarter, that would be April 1st to June 30th of 2022. As a reason for the second delay, ESA officials said that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected both activities at development facilities in Europe and the launch site of the rocket, which is in French Guiana. According to the Director of Space Transportation at the European Space Agency, Daniel Neuschwander, we can say today that COVID-19 has led to an extension of activities on the critical path. Currently, the development teams are working on the cryogenic arms, which will link their rocket with the launch pad. Apart from the global pandemic situation, Neuschwander talked about some technical issues regarding the rocket. The Ariane 6 rocket has an auxiliary power unit inside its upper stage, which will directly insert satellites into geostationary orbit rather than a transfer orbit. It's a unique feature that distinguishes Ariane 6's upper stage with other rockets. Now, according to Neuschwander, the auxiliary power is quite new and still not ready. Now, delaying a rocket launch could also cause some problems, such as it could increase the total cost. Neuschwander talked about an additional cost requirement for the Ariane 6 launch delay. In a conference call, the European Space Agency's General Director, Jan Warner, also said that the European member states have to contribute an additional 230 million euros, about 270 million American dollars, for a complete development of the Ariane 6 rocket. Overall, it denotes a 6% increase from the previous development cost. As per that, Eric Berger, a senior space editor, posted on Twitter, ESA will ask member states for an additional 230 million euros to pay for Ariane 6 development above existing budgets. The total development cost for the Ariane 6 rocket, including an extra 230 million euros and the cost for a new launch site in French Guiana, is around 3.8 billion euros, or 4.4 billion US dollars, which is significantly more than the approximate cost to develop SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. That's indeed a lot of money for developing a rocket. ESA's Ariane 6 is designed to compete with the Falcon 9 rocket. However, NASA has invested more money than the Ariane 6 project on its recent large rocket projects, such as the Space Launch System or the Ares 1 booster. The Ares 1 booster already made a test flight before its cancellation, but those rockets were not designed to be competitive in the commercial market. Things are getting heated up for the commercial launch market. Private space companies are competing with each other to launch payloads for other satellite companies or countries who don't have their own launch programs. ESA's Ariane 6 rocket is expected to be the continent's best answer for a competitive commercial launch market. In the history of the commercial launch market, Europe and Russia were a powerful force that dominated this industry for a long time, until Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, made its debut with the Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket successfully carried out many satellite missions for a much lower cost. Since 2018, SpaceX made significant progress with its Falcon 9 launches. Again, Falcon 9 has a reusable first-stage booster, which saves the additional cost of developing a brand new booster. Now, to complete with the Falcon 9, ESA's Ariane 6 rocket has to be more cost-effective, which is a major objective behind developing the rocket. Aside from the fact that it costs more than that to develop a Falcon 9, the Ariane 6 rocket had the ability to ferry 2 large satellites to geostationary orbit with several decades of launch reliability. SpaceX's Block 5 version of Falcon 9 now stands alongside the Atlas V booster in the list of the most reliable launchers in the world, which flies more frequently than any other rocket. The Falcon 9 Block 5 is specially optimized for rapid reusability. It comes with a number of improvements from the normal version, which helps the booster for an easy touchdown. Thus, a Falcon 9 rocket can outcompete other similarly sized rockets with a cheap price, which makes it a more trusted option in this commercial launch market. Although the ESA and member nations cannot trust a foreign country to launch their satellites, the Ariane 6, as Europe's main heavy-lift rocket, will always have a list of institutional customers on for commercial launches. However, it also depends on Ariane 6's ability to peel off commercial satellite launches. The rocket still has a lot of time before its debut in 2022. In our last segment, we'll discuss some news regarding NASA. NASA's 43-year-old Voyager 2 spacecraft replied with a signal after receiving a set of commands from NASA mission operators on October 29th. It was the first time that Voyager 2 received a command since March. NASA was using a 70-meter wide, it's about 230 feet wide, radio antenna to talk with the spacecraft. However, it was offline for some time due to some upgrades and repairs. The spacecraft returned a signal to the mission operators, which confirmed that it had received the call and successfully executed the commands. By sending a call to Voyager 2, NASA was testing its new hardware that was recently installed on Deep Space Station 43, located in Canberra, Australia, is the only dish capable of sending commands to Voyager 2. NASA is using the dish as part of a deep space network, a collection of radio antennas around the world for communication with spacecraft operating beyond the moon. With that call, NASA gave a hint that the dish will be online again in February 2021. What makes this task unique is that we're doing work at all levels of the antenna, from the pedestal at ground level all the way up to the feed cones at the center of the dish that extend above the rim. Brad Arnold, who is the DSN project manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Southern California, stated, "This test communication with Voyager 2 definitely tells us that things are on track with the work we're doing." The dish uses a powerful frequency to send commands in space. It comes with 2 new radio transmitters. Among them, one is used to talk with the spacecraft, which NASA did not replace in over 47 years. Moreover, engineers have worked on the heating and cooling equipment, power supply equipment, and other electronics for running the new transmitters. The first time Deep Space Station 43 began operating was in 1972. At that time, it was only 64 meters or 210 feet wide, which NASA expanded to 70 meters or 230 feet in 1987. Since then, it's received several modifications by engineers. Now it's the only dish in the Southern Hemisphere with an ability to send commands to distant spacecraft. According to Philip Baldwin, who's the manager for NASA's Space Communications and Navigation Program, the Deep Space Station 43 antenna is a highly specialized system. There are only 2 other similar antennas in the world, so having the antenna down for 1 year is not an ideal situation for Voyager or for many other NASA missions. The agency made the decision to conduct these upgrades to ensure that the antenna can continue to be used for current and future missions. For an antenna that's almost 50 years old, it's better to be proactive than react with critical maintenance. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this. Hit the like button if you find the video interesting, and kindly provide your valuable feedback in the comment section. This will help us to improve.